Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about a single book. Yes, it's time to talk about another book. This is going to be about The Secret History by Donna Tartt, which I finished last week and then didn't talk about. So this is what we're going to do today. Let's get this started, shall we? Cheers. Well, we're going to do this the usual way, which is I'll give you a quick synopsis kind of thing of like, yeah, if you haven't read it, this is what you get. Go read it. And then we're going to go into the spoilerish, sort of spoilerish discussion. I'll say it once again, this is not a book where you can do a lot of spoilers. There's very little that can be actually spoiled. But I know some people are sensitive about this kind of thing, so here we go. All right. The Secret History by Donna Tartt, released in 1992. Apparently a lot of people love it. And when I looked it up on Wikipedia, which is a site on the internet which I don't trust, it told me that it is one of the most important texts of dark academia, which I didn't know, so I looked it up on Wikipedia, which is a page I do not trust, and it said it's an aesthetic on platforms like Tumblr and Instagram and TikTok, which are platforms on the internet I do not use, except Instagram sometimes, but I haven't used it in like a month and a bit because I'm still in the process of ghosting everyone ever out there because I just couldn't bear contact, communication for a while. Anyway, my point is, it's sort of a thing where people dress up in tweed, just like Philip Chase, and drink alcohol, just like me, and pretend to know as much about anything like as AP Canavan. Basically, that's how I understood it. But you also have to look really good, which is something that I'm not sure if any of us can actually pull that one off. So there we go. Apparently, it's a thing I did not know about. My point is, beyond that, it is a novel set in the the early 80s in a college, a liberal arts college in Vermont, and it's about a small group of people that do something terrible, and it then examines the main question there, which is, how did it ever go so far? How did we come to this? Is the big question that it examines. So it is basically a murder mystery, but the mystery is not who done it. The mystery is like, why did they do it? And that's sort of what you get. And that's all the spoilers you need, but I think that part is already on the back cover, so I hope I didn't spoil too much. It's that kind of novel. It's a student novel. It's a college novel. It's a very pretentious novel that quotes a lot of ancient Greek stuff and sort of looks at a specific way of doing humanities academia, I guess, in a way, and examines, the close, interpersonal relationships of a small, tight-knit group and how those, group dynamics can lead to bad things, even if no one actually planned to do bad things. That's sort of the main story here. It is extremely well written, extremely smoothly written. I'm not using the word prose because the person that knows so much about academia, that being AP Canavan, told me that prose is the wrong word. We're talking about style. No shade on AP, he's right there. He's very much right there, and I'm glad he actually mentioned that and I could learn that. Anyway, so Donna Tartt's style is extremely smooth. It uses long words, it uses short words, it manages to actually evoke a fascinating, dark-ish atmosphere. It does a lot of things extremely well. It also has one of the most accurate descriptions of a hangover I've ever read. Spoiler there, someone gets drunk at some point. And it does all of that extremely well and examines all these things. So it's well worth reading. I don't know about the dark academia stuff. I'll just say it's a well-written literary fiction novel about people growing up, trying to figure out who they are, trying to actually deal with the world out there and so forth in a fascinating way. I read it in 2 or 3 days, and I was very happy with that book. It's great. Go read it. You won't regret it. I promise. And now that we've got all of that out of the way, there's no real trigger warnings here. Um, there's no very graphic violence or anything of the sort, so you should be safe there. Um, yeah, I guess that's that. Go read it, and then come back and we talk about what's good about it, what's bad about it, and other things that I associated with it. All right, you read it? That's perfect. Let's talk about some more of the deeper shit about this book. And that first thing that we need to talk about here is the portrait of academia that it has, because there's something in here, and bear with me, I'm going to wander a bit off the beaten track and look at stuff, and I think there's something important here that might kind of flow into the whole dark academia thing, which I don't understand. And that is the setting. So it's a liberal arts college in the 80s in the US, in Vermont, which I think is important there as well. And it concerns those five? Let me think. I'm already confusing now. It's six people, right? Six students and Professor Julian, whatever his Morrow, that's his name, Julian Morrow. And they are studying the classics, by which I mean Greek philology. They're translating Greek language. And it does something here that I think is very, very specific to a very specific part of US, possibly even Canadian, North American academia, North American way of looking at especially classical Greece and possibly Rome. And that is where I think it's important to look at this novel, where, you know, people call it like a classic Greek tragedy in a way, and it does use all of these things. But what I find interesting here is, and I would call this a Renaissance novel. It's more of a Renaissance. It's more of a Renaissance novel than anything else. What do I mean by that? The point is, during the Renaissance, which you already know, because you're smart people, not like me, is that people in Western Europe were like, wow, look, we discovered the Greeks and the Romans, and they were so much better than us. And then they built up and constructed that image of Greek and Roman society in a lot of different ways, partly built on the foundation of texts they recovered by, you know, buying them from the Ottomans and the Arabs and other people that had taken over those places before and knew all about Aristotle, while we were just, reading Aquinas, which is the only thing we could do. Not that Aquinas didn't also read, philosophers, but still, you know what I mean. Point is, that image of Greece and Rome is largely a construction. It is a construction that is unfortunately mixed with a lot of veneration. It's sort of something that we see later on in like the 19th century when we look at, all these romantics creating whatever you might call Norse mythology and, the Middle Ages and shit like that, which we have to talk about at a different place. But this is sort of what we see in the Renaissance happening in a way. We have an ideal image of Greek society, which is more or less built up from whatever we found in Plato and Aristotle, and maybe some of the tragedy writers, like the dramatists like Sophocles and Euripides, and maybe Aeschylus, but I guess most people only read Sophocles and maybe Euripides, which you should do. There's some fantastic stuff in there, trust me. It really is. Point is, that does not necessarily bear a lot of resemblance to the actual, life of people in, say, classic Greece in like 400 BCE, during, say, the Peloponnesian War. Like Periclean Greece, Periclean Athens was probably very different from anything people in the Renaissance thought about Periclean Athens. And that is because it is something of an ideal people tried to live up to. And then you go and read like Machiavelli's Roman history, when he tries to torn apart Italy into a new Roman republic with all the ideals of Rome that he found when he was, writing his military history of Rome and shit like that. Which, is more wishful thinking than anything else. And this is the part that I'm going to put in here for, like, as a side, there is still a part of ancient history studies, classical studies and whatnot in especially in North America, that has never really stepped away from that specific look. It's the kind of people that still believe that, the Greeks, those being, the Spartans and the Athenians, had to save the Occident from the Persians and shit like that. And that's not how that stuff happened. The point is, it is still in there. That veneration of classical Greece, of classical, of Rome, is still built very much into a lot of education, a lot of classical education and so forth. It is still in there. It's something that is probably connected to, say, America, thinking the U.S. thinking of themselves of itself as the first, Western democracy after Greece, and building that imaginary line of tradition from Greek democracy to American democracy. We're not going to examine all of that today because this is not me holding history lectures here for now. Important is that stuff is still in there, and most of that is wishful thinking and ideology and made up, and has nothing to do with actual facts, which are hard to come by because we're talking history here. We're talking history where we don't have, all the receipts, shopping lists and whatnot like we have in, say, Sumeria or Babylon, but have only like very few documents that were written specifically to be published, which don't necessarily, reflect everyday life in, say, classical Greece. Now, why is that important? It is important because the way Julian Morrow is structuring his classes with those couple of students, those 6 students, is sort of the epitome of that very specific way of doing it, right? It is all built up almost like a Socratic, like the Platonic school, or like the Socratic school as portrayed by Plato in Platonic dialogues, where you have the wise master giving answers and questions, having dialogues through which he, it's always a he in those situations, makes those students remember things they basically already knew, because there are universal truths and they can drag them out through clever questioning and working and adding all these personal connections in there and so forth. That's exactly what you see in that group. And there's a process there in Platonic philosophy called anamnesis, which is exactly that. It's like amnesia obviously means, not knowing something, and the idea is that we know those universal truths, and we go back, and if we ask the right questions, we can remember those things, remember those things, or unforget them, I guess is the proper translation here. It's in Plato's dialogue Menon, I think, where we have that whole situation where Socrates is talking to his student Menon, and they get themselves a slave, because slaves don't know anything in ancient Greece, and then Socrates is asking that slave a lot of questions. At the end of the day, that slave can understand basic geometry through those questions, which is sort of seen as a proof that we know stuff before. And it feels like Julian is sort of doing the same thing, and it works, but it works because of personal charm, not because there's actual truths behind it, not because, Platonic philosophy works, not because Socratic dialogues actually lead to knowing stuff that you actually knew before and are now unforgetting. It's not that. It's just the personal charm of Julian Morrow turning people into a small elite that thinks they know better, that thinks they are better, or, there's a lot of elitism going on there in that specific group, which then knits that group very tightly and makes those dynamics coming out of there beyond. It's basically cult tactics in a way going on there. And I think that's a way to read this book that is very important to understand. So what we get is a small group that falls for someone that is either consciously or subconsciously, either honestly trying to emulate those fictitious Greek examples, those fictitious Greek ideals that he has taken from reading too much Plato or reading Plato through the lens of Renaissance thinking and American exceptionalism, and taking those ideals and behaving in that way. And we see that the consequence is forming that very small, tight-knit group that has all these weird social dynamics within it. Or yeah, or he's doing that on purpose because he's just manipulative. We don't know. It's never fully answered that question, but I think it's important to understand that. So we have the dark side of trying to emulate an image of a society that was already created by us. It's trying to be someone that we thought was better than us was. You know what I mean? That was a complicated sentence right there. But, it's all I can do right now. So we have that part. Then we have what do you have with the small in-group that first thinks that they are better than the rabble out there, the normal people that thinks of themselves as a small elite, an in-group because they are chosen. I think this is an important aspect. We have a dynamic of like an economic a financial dynamic in there that we're going to look at in a moment. What we also have here is the point that they are chosen. It's not like you can just like subscribe to, just join Julian Morrow's class and then maybe join this one group of friends. No, he has to actually personally allow you into his class, and he only picks very specific people. So you are chosen ones. You are almost like, following your savior. You're one of those 12, in this case only 6, but you know what I mean, right? It has that dynamic, and that leads to, because, in a small way, people that think of themselves as being special, try special things. They believe that they can do things that other people cannot do, which is what happens with that whole, like, bacchanalia thing that they're trying to do, and we don't know if they're just like really stoned or whatever happened there, because it remains something of a mystery there. But the idea of going beyond, breaking the bonds of rationality, because that makes you, I don't want to use the word Ubermensch here, but it kind of goes in that direction, I guess, that beyond good and evil thing. Isn't there like a Nietzsche quote in there somewhere? I think there is. And I think it's important to see that that's exactly what happens. People thinking of themselves as being more than human, being special, and trying something special that no one has tried for a long time, for possibly good reasons. And trying it along a very specific route that is, once again, something that is seen through our lens in a lot of ways, and then dealing with the consequences. And someone not understandably saying like, holy shit, you people are insane. But because you're in a very specific social dynamic, a very small, tight-knit group, breaking out of that, it's like, yeah, like trying to break out of a cult. And that leads to, Bunny's mental breakdown, ongoing mental breakdown. And I think there's an interesting dynamic in that book here when we look at the claim. And this I find very fascinating, which is... when you look at Wikipedia, which once again is a website I don't trust, it claims that Bunny is blackmailing the rest of the group because he knows that they've killed the farmer, right? But when you read the text, that's never the point. He never goes like, all right, I go to the police or you. Now, what actually happens is the Bunny just breaks down. And it's like, these are my friends, I trust them, and they have done this terrible thing. And the rest is like, all right, we'll just give him more money so he'll shut up. So they assume he's blackmailing, but there's never an explicit like blackmail going on until like the absolute end of the whole thing. And even then it's not that. It's like more like, yeah. And I think that's an interesting aspect, because you can read it as blackmail, but it's never that. That's the narrative of people like Henry and whatnot, right? That's the weird part there that I think... that I found when I was looking at that website that I don't trust. So we have that part that I wanted to talk about, which is the very specific way of looking at the classics that is part of American mostly North American academia in a way that is kind of weird. Then we have that whole idea of a cult situation going on there, and the consequences of that, and how that sometimes leads. And this, I think, is the other part, is like because of like using that very specific mode of thinking that we have going on there with that group, because of like how they, look at that Greek ideal and say, well, suddenly, you know, there are options and there are non-options in a way that are very different from like how we look at stuff today. Suddenly killing someone seems to be the only way out, in a way that I don't know if that's actually, there's a lot of like auto suggestion going on there that leads to that very specific ending of the novel in that way. Plus, you obviously have a lot of like stuff around that we'll, look at in a moment, which is the pretentiousness part. All right, let's look at the pretentiousness part. Now, this book is obviously written for an academic audience in a lot of ways, which is fine. Don't get me wrong, that's fine. It quotes a lot of Greek. It name drops a lot of people like Hesiod, which yeah, I've read Works and Days, and I've read the Theogonia. Theogony. I've read that stuff. Anyway, point is, it quotes a lot of Greek. It quotes a lot of French authors. It quotes a lot of smart people, so to speak, or it quotes a lot of like literary canon or academic canon in a lot of ways, and that's where things become kind of weird and maybe become more like dark academia, because it does so in places where it is not specifically about that very specific in-group of 6 students that thinks of themselves as super smart. It does so all over the text, no matter who's speaking, no matter who, whatnot. There is that arrogance, and I think that's partly because it's written in first person, and Richard Papin, even though he's sort of the outsider coming into that group and whatnot, is still an arrogant bastard. He's very arrogant. You see that when we have that whole episode with Bunny's family and stuff like that. It's like he's still a pretentious pseudo-intellectual son of a bitch, and that remains in a way. But it can be somewhat daunting to read. In that regard, because it does overflow with that. It's a kind of book, and you can like either say, holy shit, that's pretentious, or you can say it's sort of trying to drag you in, right? It's like you read that book and you suddenly feel like part of the in-group. Now I'll leave that up to you, I guess. If you're a fan of Donna Tartt and love the book, you'll probably say, yeah, see, that's exactly what she was trying to do there. It's all about you starting to be drawn in, feeling smart because you got all the references and stuff. And like, yeah, but it's still pretentious because it still leaves people on the outside unless they, Google everything. And it's sort of a level of self-reflection that you can't expect readers to have, I guess, or you shouldn't, in a way. Like, it's a bonus if that happens, but, there's going to be a lot of people out there who will just, like, drop that book because they are overawed by that level of, quoting stuff for shame. Anyway, let's move on. The economic element, which I think is sort of the other important one. We have a lot of people here, and I think there's a point there that is important, which is studying the classics. Studying classics at a liberal arts college is an economic privilege, unless you get in through, ways like Richard Papin, through like charity and whatnot. It is extremely difficult to do that. It's a privilege to be able to do that, and these people behave like that in a lot of ways. And the unfortunate thing is that that's where it stays. Like, yeah, they can afford to be these people, and it never goes beyond that. Now, it's left up to you to say, like, fuck that system where people who want to study Greek can't do so because they're not chosen by their wise master, and also they probably just can't afford the tuition fees and whatnot. It's like, it leaves out that economic element in favor of aesthetics, which I guess is sort of the bridge to dark academia, which I don't understand, is exactly that. It's sort of, it's a privileged aesthetic. that also glorifies being, you know, abusing yourself, I guess is the word. It's like we have that whole with Richard Papin, who is sort of like more like the average guy, right? He doesn't have a lot of money. His parents don't understand him. He's, yeah, I want to be smart and I want to be wise like the Greeks. I want to be part of the elite and whatnot. So I'll freeze to death in a warehouse in winter because I'm too shy to actually admit that I'm poor. And it does a lot of these things very well because, yeah, that's stuff that we all deal with. But it never goes beyond, showing that that stuff happens, never questions the actual state, and never goes and like, yeah, asks that question like, so why is everyone feeling that they should be the elite? Why does everyone admire those people? Why is that? And shouldn't we just maybe go and just punch those people in the face for once? And maybe take down the system? It does never do that. And I think that's like the danger with that book, in a way that it just leaves it there, and it doesn't necessarily glorify it, but it makes it very easy to just say like, wow, isn't that cool? They just hang around, they just like drive everywhere, they get drunk, they have this huge house where they can live because all of them are, not all of them, but some of them are actually millionaires, and they can just do all these wonderful things and be smart on the side and maybe look glorious and languid. And no one can do that. And it's only getting worse. Or maybe we should just like actually stop glorifying that, or leaving it open as this like sort of, I can't do this, but I can look like that with enough filters on Instagram, which is a platform I don't use most of the time. You know what I mean? And that's something that kind of made me angry in a way, because like, and that's my personal taste. I mean, you can totally go and read that, and you can find the criticism in there. And I read it as like, holy shit, how can that be? But yeah, I'm one for the torches and pitchforks most of the time. You know that. And I felt very much like torches and pitchforks a lot of times. So there's that. Guys, this is a mess. Anyway, final thoughts. As I said, like that whole like display of how specific parts of humanities are still handled, I found very interesting and well done. Maybe I'm reading too much into that because I have a different background, and it just pisses me off, and I feel like a lot of people reading the book are probably not getting that very specific view on it that I just laid out here for you in very meandering, note that Greek word, did you know it's a river? Did you? Anyway, in meandering terms, I did take all of these things out of it. I'm not sure how many other people do that. I do see the danger of people just reading the book and it's like, oh, wouldn't it be cool? I guess I'll get a tweed jacket and talk about the best of fantasy. No. You see where I'm going with this. Anyway, point is, it's a fantastic read. It made me think a lot about how we do academia, how we look at things. I'm not sure how much of that was just me projecting a lot of personal things that I've been thinking about for like ages into the book, and how much of it was actually in there. But then again, this is the strength of the novel, right? It's like we can put so much of ourselves into that and take something new out of it, or something, give us a way to talk about the things that we think about in interesting ways. And at the end of the day, the character study, the way how the group dynamic actually works out and leads to that one ending is top notch. It's a fantastic novel in that regard, and I really enjoyed that aspect. I don't have much more to say. It's like, don't fall for those people. Don't think ancient Greece was great, especially when it's all about Spartans, but also when it's about Athenians. Don't trust Plato, even though he's better than Aristotle. And I don't know. You don't need to go for like a full bacchanalia. You can just like get drunk on weekends, and that's fine. But don't drink too much. It will also destroy your health. All right, that's basically all I have to say on The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I'm glad I read it. I'm not going to go back into dark academia. I already read Waking the Moon by Elizabeth Hand last year, which I think is sort of a thematic answer to this book in a lot of ways that I was not aware at the time, because I just read it because I love Elizabeth Hand's work, and I'm like, wow, this is awesome. But she does go into a way more explicit, also way more supernatural element with it, and does other things that I personally really appreciate about it that we don't see too much in here. Well, that's a personal thing. Like, if you love The Secret History, I would recommend reading Waking the Moon, possibly, because It's a good book. More people should talk about it. Also, more white goddess worship, which is something that I, as an Atlantean Codex fan, can subscribe to. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you read The Secret History, and if so, let me know what you think about it. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share, do the wonderful things. If you feel that I should not freeze in winter, you can still think about joining the Patreon. I might actually knit you a warm, woolly hat as a thank you. And you can even pick the color. Anyway, thanks for that. See you around. Cheers.